Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, honorable guests. The good news is that here comes the final part of today's very intensive forum. Okay, so we now have 4 distinguished panelists to join this panel and explore more of the possibilities of what AI can bring to us from the society perspective. Because I think the whole day we have learned a lot about AI's latest development, especially a lot of technical issues have been addressed. So my questions for this panel will be specifically related to non-technical issues. Okay, so let me briefly introduce the panelists again. So Professor Peter Solovich and Dr. Ned Magaud and Professor Sebastian Liao and also Dr. Ben Armstrong. Okay. So we have this very interesting combination because 2 from the technical background, Professor Solovich and Dr. Armstrong are from a technical background, and Professor Liao is from the social science background, and Dr. Magaud is a bit hybrid, right? So you major in English literature and later switch to data science. So since the other 3 have given their speech...
I'm not a technical background, sorry.
Sorry?
I don't want to be a wolf in sheep's clothing. I'm not from I'm a social scientist as well.
You're a social scientist. Okay, that's good. Yeah. So you can get the chance to introduce again after
just to clarify.
Dr. Magaud. So would you like to briefly introduce yourself to the audience first before I start my questions?
Is this on? It is. Hi, everybody. I guess as the only person who hasn't been on the stage today, I should introduce myself. My name is Ned McKeag. I teach a couple of classes at MIT focused on data science and medicine. I also teach at Boston University where I teach machine learning in healthcare and research methods. So I have a graduate degree in biostatistics, but as was mentioned a moment ago, I actually started in undergrad as English literature. So I feel like I've got maybe the left brain, right brain dichotomy going on. Additionally, I work at a wearables startup in Boston called Python. We early stage Series A, working towards a Series B. So if you have any questions about that after this, I'm happy to talk more. It was great to talk with all of you.
So Dr. Armstrong?
Yes, I just spoke, so I'll leave the time for the other panelists, but I'm a social scientist from MIT, very happy to be here.
Okay, so Dr. Liao, Professor Liao, would you like to say something about yourself first?
Yeah, sure. I'm actually in the humanities rather than a social scientist.
Excuse me.
No, excuse me. My field is basically literary theories, comparative literature, poetics, Taoist studies, Taoist thinking. And it just happened that most recently, well, actually in the last 6 years, I've been working on techno-humanities. So humanities related to, the development of technology. So, so that's probably why I've been invited here. But what I'm interested in is less, even though that's important too, or more or less a part of my study. But ethics is not the very core of my research, but actually how we can coexist with technological products such as AI. So I have written articles on AI and evil, whether or not AI can do evil spontaneously, AI and creativity, and how can we develop some kind of empathy between AI and the human beings, things like that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So now it's a kind of 3-to-1 combination here. So they 3 have this humanity and social science background. So Professor Solovich, would you like to add something about yourself?
Well, just a couple of things. I'm not purely a technologist.
So you're also from
my thesis advisor was a logician and philosopher, and I inherited some of his worldview. And I've been working in the medical field for the last 50 years. I met some doctors when I was a young professor at MIT and decided that healthcare was a really interesting driving function for AI research because it had a lot of problems that required, I thought, AI solutions, but was an independent field that came with its own problem sets. And so a lot of the work that happened in AI on probabilistic reasoning, for example, I think was motivated by healthcare, because nothing is certain in healthcare, whereas in many areas of AI, things are more certain. So I have, I confess to a little bit of that mixed background.
So yeah, it's nice to know that. So I know why the organizer puts up such a panel, because all four have this humanity or social science background. So the subject for this panel is, are we ready for a good AI society? We now have 8 billion population in the world. And ideally, everyone can afford computers, mobile phones, internet connection, Wi-Fi, 5G, so on and so forth. But the fact is that there is an equal access to this kind of gadgets, device, or tools. So among the societies or to society, which creates what we call the digital divide, a gap between the haves and have-nots. So my first question is that with AI becoming more pervasive and powerful, in your opinion, is AI going to narrow the digital divide or widen it? Should there be a joint effort among nations to set a guideline and rules for AI, or just simply let the free market rule apply and adjust? So since all four have this humanity background, so I'd like to start with Professor Solovich.
I was born in a little village in eastern Hungary that didn't have electricity when I was born. And so there was a tremendous digital divide or electrical divide at that point. Now, in most of the world, there is electricity. And my guess is that something like that will happen with AI. First of all, it may not be as important as electricity has turned out to be. But even if it is, I think there will be definitely a maldistribution of its availability, which will gradually ease as it becomes more of a conventional technology. So that doesn't mean that the people who are on the short end of that stick right now are not missing out opportunities and suffering as a result. And I think we need to do as much as we can in order to make the technology available to whoever wants it and to whoever it's beneficial. But I think in the long run, the problem will probably solve itself.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. McCouch?
Yeah, I think this is a really great question. When I think of technology divide, I think of access to tools and understanding of those tools. And as it relates to the understanding of the tools, I think that, the change at pace is just enormous right now. I think it's like every month, every quarter, there's just game-changing publications that are really challenging to keep up with as somebody who teaches graduate level courses in the space. So that divide on the knowledge is growing. I certainly feel that. At the same time, I really feel that a lot of my students are benefiting from some of these tools in terms of their ability to understand new material, in terms of getting on board and starting at the early stages of their careers. So there's this element of understanding that I think is really interesting, where you've got this force that's accelerating and this other force that's creating access.
Okay, thank you. And Professor Liao?
I think there's going to be, in the future, or even now actually, there's going to be two kinds of divides. One is that between, those who can have access to AI and those who cannot. And that's very obvious. But there's another divide which I believe, if not more important, at least equally important, is that, there's going to be people, like I already mentioned in my presentation, there's going to be, a divide between people who can creatively make use of AI and who cannot. And the second group will eventually become, slaves of AI, rather than, people who can actually use AI. I mean, to operate AI is not a problem. In the future, it's going to become very intuitive, right? Just like our cell phones, it's a computer, but everybody can handle it. Right? So in the future, well, When I still remember when I was writing my PhD dissertation, we were all asked to write code, to learn to write code, in order to put all the notes at the bottom of the page. But halfway through the workshop, the university just said, "Oh, you don't do this. You don't need to do this anymore because Windows is out." So in the end, everything is going to become very simple. But the difference would be whether or not you can use it creatively. You're using prompts, creative prompts that are creative enough to produce interesting results. And this, I think, is probably even more important than the previous divide, because the previous divide is just a matter of money, right? But the second divide would have to be a new kind of education, which is completely oriented toward creativity.
Okay, and Dr. Armstrong?
So I thought you were going to go a slightly different way with that. So I thought you were the two divides that I was thinking were some who have access, some who don't, and then also some who really want to use AI and think that it makes their life, their jobs better, and some who really opt out and say, I don't choose to use these tools. I don't feel like they're making me better in a significant way at the core things that either make me fulfilled or whatever else. And I think we see this historically in organizations, that some organizations kind of ride the wave of new technology, and other organizations say, actually, this technology isn't going to make my organization more successful. One example is a grocery store chain in the United States called Trader Joe's, that there was in retail, about a decade ago, a big push for automated checkout to essentially remove the people from the end of the grocery line. And Trader Joe's said, well, that is actually not going to improve our productivity, that the people and their knowledge are going to be faster than individual customers. So they opted not to invest in that technology and still haven't. And they actually have double the revenue per square foot of their competitors. So there are multiple ways to, I think, compete, to find fulfillment as an individual, and it doesn't necessarily require you to engage with the latest technological tools.
Okay, thank you. And I remember I went to MIT in 1999 for several interviews on a special report, and I talked to I remember Dr. Michael DeTuzos, also Victor Zhu from the Lab for Computer Science, also Ronnie Brooks from the AI Lab, to do, because back then they were doing a program named Oxygen, which aims to make computer use, pervasive and easy to most of the people. And a few years later, there was another program, this $500 laptop, initiated by Media Lab, also from MIT. Both programs addressed to solve the problem of the digital divide. So in your opinion, start from Dr. Armstrong, should there be a similar initiative, a global initiative, whether from the research institutes, universities, or even government, to help address this digital divide that could possibly be generated from AI?
This isn't, I would say no is my immediate example, partly because of all the negative consequences of those efforts, particularly one laptop per child, which was the later
But
Media
both
Lab
didn't
effort.
work out, but I think the intention,
Yeah.
the original
No.
intention was good.
Yeah, well, I think that there's just a fundamental difference between this distribution of hardware that becomes pretty fundamental to engaging in this, to accessing this new, essentially libraries of information around the world. And then a lot of that core access, you'll also be able to have access to many of these AI tools, because it's what we're beginning to see is that what we call AI, separate from generative AI, is already being threaded into a lot of the software that we use every day, right? If you use Google Translate, if you use the navigation apps, right? All of this, you're using different tools that have already been built in. So I don't think that poses the same fundamental challenge of access versus not as other, let's say, hardware technologies, electricity, clean water, right? These more fundamental goods for life.
Okay, and Professor Solovich?
Well, I don't know. I don't know what the right policy moves are. My take on this is that one laptop per child did not succeed as a project, mainly because it was just about money. So you could buy the same laptop that they wanted to build, only you had to pay 2 or 3 times as much money for it. And with time, that got solved, and there was no need for that project. Project Oxygen, I think, contemplated the iPhone, which took a long time to come, but when it came not because of an MIT project. It came because partly the Taiwanese companies that invested in Project Oxygen had developed the technologies that made the iPhone possible, and partly because Steve Jobs and Apple had the vision to say, okay, now's the time and let's do it. But that was much more of a qualitative change. You couldn't buy a BlackBerry for 3 times as much money that would solve the problem that the iPhone solved. And so I think you have to be careful to pick where you want to do things. And in that case, it didn't require government investment or government regulation. It required creativity on the part of designers and industrial production and so on.
Okay, thank you. And also, Dr.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I think we're so early in the game, it's hard to talk about some of these broader policy considerations. I really wish I had a great answer here, but I think we're just so early in this. It's a challenge to respond to this. I think of Francois Chollet's position that he thinks of AI and machine learning and deep neural nets as we're sort of in the middle ages of this, and we're still expanding. What I've been very interested in is a lot of technology companies are very invested in trying to make this technology as available as possible to as many people as possible. So I've obviously there's still a digital divide there. There's still necessity to have a computer, access to internet and everything else. But I think there's I'll be interested to see what happens in the next year, 5 years, a decade before I think we talk about policies maybe. But I think it's a really interesting question.
Okay, thank you. And Professor Liao.
Yeah, I'm quite optimistic in this regard, but quite pessimistic in other regards. In this regard, I believe that eventually everybody's going to be able to use AI in their phones, right, in their smartphones. And smartphones is going to get cheaper, are going to get cheaper and cheaper. So it would.
Apropos.
She's protesting.
Is that an AI agent that help you prepare you the answers?
Anyway, I wouldn't think that is going to be a problem. But the real problem lies in the fact that lies in the divide between, again, those who can creatively use AI and those who cannot. So, a friend of mine, a German friend of mine, who told me once that in Germany there are 1/10 of the population is on social welfare. And he was not happy with that, but he thought it was necessary. Because then, the social order is not a problem. And I think in the future, this problem, the haves and the have-nots, the distance between them would become larger and larger. And those who are in power, those who have wealth, would become an even smaller percentage. The percentage would keep shrinking. So how, as also Yuval Harari has also kind of prophesized in his book Homo Deus. Right? And so I think the most urgent problem would be how to take care of those have-nots, those who can't really, who can only subsist in this AI-dominated world. And then I think the governments, and maybe all governments, should work together to figure out a way, to of course, the education itself has to try to give as many people creativity as possible. Make them creative as much as possible, so that you can enlarge the number of haves, those who have, and reduce the number of those who do not have. But eventually, there's going to be a huge number who can only subsist in the AI-dominated world. So how are you going to, make them feel happy? That's very important. I'm not talking about, Brave New World. Kind of.
Sure, sure. Nowadays, and I believe in the future too, there are a lot of AI projects going on. And mostly we see a lot of scientists, engineers, also investors and entrepreneurs dedicate their resource and time to these AI projects, which is good. But my question is that apart from the above professionals, how can professionals from other fields contribute to the development of AI to reduce the potential risk and bias? So how about start from you, Dr. McElch?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. As somebody who's in the healthcare space, we talk about this a lot. In Boston, the MIMIC database is a huge component of healthcare research, and it comes from Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. So with my lab, the Lab of Computational Physiology. That is a largely white, upper class and Catholic population. There's even some folks who are JC scientists. So there's a unique population there versus just down the road at Boston Medical Center, that's a tier 3 safety net dish status hospital that has a largely indigent population. It would be awesome, it'd be wonderful if we could get that data into that ecosystem. So I think that it would be great if different healthcare institutions could break down these data silos and contribute data in an open access way to fuel some of this. This has historically not been even possible, or even there's been no motivation, no incentive to do that. And this may be the beginning of it. So I think that would be something that I would love to see in the next stretch of time.
Okay, a follow-up question that if to do so, in your opinion, what are the top 3 on the list that needs to be added to the AI, development team, and why?
Added to the AI development team. I think that it's about, you mentioned executives, but it's not all executives. There's executives at certain institutions that have a unique incentive now to maybe enter the data space and contribute open data in a way that they haven't previously. So it's not even about what titles, it's about who from that class of that population. So when we're talking about healthcare executives, it's healthcare executives at hospitals that normally maybe wouldn't be part of those conversations. It's it's academic medical centers that have data that they've been hoarding for a long time. It may be patients themselves making data accessible in a way that they've never really had a chance to. So I think those would be that's what comes to the top of my mind.
Okay, so Professor, what about your list of these?
So I would paint a broader picture. I certainly agree with him because I have been involved in that database creation, and one of my great frustrations, as Roger Marks and Leo Celis and everybody else's, has been that it's harder than pulling teeth to get anybody else to contribute to that data set. So I agree with that. But I think about, for example, MIT started the Schwarzman College of Computing with a very generous grant from Mr. Schwarzman, strangely enough. The purpose of that school is to try to broaden the conversation so that AI and computing are not just about computer scientists. So it has given us the opportunity over about a period of 8 or 10 years to hire 50 new faculty members, and half of them are primarily computational people, and half of them are primarily people who use computation in their research but are not computationalists primarily. And so this is an attempt to bring in people from science, philosophy, humanities, social sciences, engineering, of course, other fields, and to create a nexus where people can study what's the best way to develop these problems. Now, I think what I've noticed is that even among the technologists that we've hired so far, young faculty members, many of them are vitally interested in issues that are not traditionally part of computer science. So, for example, issues of equity and of fairness and of bias in data and the models that get built from them. And so I think we're trying to live up to the promise of that broader tent that you're talking about. But it's a work in progress.
Okay, thank you. And Professor Liao, what about your list of the top 3 that needs to be added to the AI development list, other than scientists, engineers, investors, executives?
Right. Well, I agree with both of our colleagues that, I think most importantly, of course, people in the humanities and social sciences, and maybe also kind of the related areas, for instance, public health in the medicine. Let me just give you an example of why this is very urgent. I think we all know that the translation technology, owing to the input of AI, development of AI, now the translation technology is very, very, very sophisticated. And so between the major languages, it's very easy to translate. I mean, the translation basically is adequate. But it takes maybe, someone who has been working with the minority people, for instance, the indigenous people in Taiwan, or people who are familiar with theories about the minority people. It's probably only them who can see that there is an opportunity for the indigenous people, minority people, to keep their languages. Because right now, the languages of the indigenous people in Taiwan actually are dying out very soon, one by one. Some speakers now do not even amount to, go beyond like 500. So the language is going to die in a couple of years. But if the government can, put resources into developing the kind of translation technology between Mandarin Chinese and these indigenous languages, then their language can be saved. Even though right now, of course, the linguistic data is very limited, but there are ways to do this. I mean, there are precedents, examples in other countries who are working on this by doing other, by all kinds of tricks. But anyway, this is what the people in the humanities can contribute to the development of AI in a more kind of justice-minded way, more social justice-minded way, and more kind of compassionate way. And but the government here is doing just the opposite. They are trying to enhance education in English, trying to make everybody speak English, even teach all the subjects in English. But in 10 years' time, you're going to have to rely on your native language to communicate through translation, right? And if your native language is like so sloppy, how can you even communicate with foreigners? Wow.
So in your opinion, the minority should be reserved, should be invited to join the group for the purpose of reservation of their
at least
language.
Specialists in the minority culture, or of course, better still, representatives from their communities. Of course, yeah.
Because AI is supposed to be for the public good and help to reserve not only language but other probably minority cultures instead of sweeping all these.
Yes.
Okay. And Doctor Armstrong, what about your list?
Well, I'm not sure I have a list. I like the lists that were proposed by others, but I just want to maybe underline one thing that you said, that AI is supposed to be for the public good, and I think keeping that in mind, that might be an aim, but the goal is probably the public good, that AI is not an end in itself, which I feel like sometimes in these conversations it could seem like the goal is just to build a higher performing model and not to think about the achievements that we want to do, as humans with the technology. So what I thought, as I interpreted your question, I thought about the human in the loop, as we call it, the person interpreting the results of the model. And there might be bias in the model or risk in the model, but that's different from making a biased or risky decision. So a lot of the challenge, I think, is how the human interprets the results of the model. Do they know what data is the model's trained on? Do they know what might be the shortcomings of that data? Do they know how the data is weighted? So are they able to interpret this? And in the medical examples, I know there's a heterogeneity that some people might be more knowledgeable of the underlying data and be able to understand the model better than others. And I think with generative AI, it's a whole new set of risks because these models are pretty uninterpretable. You don't necessarily know where the results came from. So I think there's a growing field of explainable AI, of providing better methods for interpretation that can be really useful here. But I think in general, as users of these tools, if we're using them to help us make decisions, it's on us to make unbiased, good decisions. So that's why I think we need to proceed with caution in using those external inputs. We need to know where they came from, think about the origins and limitations of these types of inputs.
Okay, thank you. So my next question is that if you have the opportunity to design the curriculums about AI, respectively for a 6th grader and a 60-year-old, what would they be? Start from two professors. Start with the Professor Solovich.
Well, very different curricula for the two groups.
Very different, yeah.
I think for the 6-year-olds, I think
Not 60-year-old, 6th grader, which is like
6th grader,
12-year-old,
sorry.
yeah.
Okay. Same thing. So 1st grader, 6th grader, they're similar from my age vantage point. I think the most important thing for a student is to learn enough about a topic to get excited about it. I co-lectured our introductory computer science course about 30 years ago with one of the best teachers on our faculty, Jerry Sussman. And the thing I learned from Jerry was that the purpose of a lecture is not to convey information. The purpose of a lecture is to convey excitement. And if you can give a lecture that brings to life in the mind of the student what is wonderful about the topic that you're describing, they will then go out and read the papers or read the books or ask their friends or something. They'll learn the material. And so I think that applies even more to a 6th grader than it does to an MIT student. But I think it applies pretty much across the board. For the 80-year-old, which I'm getting close to, I think this is going to sound sad. The biggest danger of AI to an 80-year-old is getting scammed. And so what I would do is design a curriculum that teaches people how not to get scammed. There are certainly 80-year-olds, and I hope to become one of them, who are very much excited by the content of the material. But I think from a social policy point of view, the biggest risk is that these AI methods are going to be able to simulate your grandchild's voice saying, hey, I lost my phone, I can't talk to you, but you'd better send me $10,000 or else my kidnappers won't let me go or something like that. And you have to teach people how not to fall for that stuff.
Okay, so for 6th graders, to encourage them to try and learn. For the 60-year-old or 80-year-old, try to not get spammed. Okay, so that's a good point. What about you, Professor Liao? So you have designed curriculums respectively for these two types of people.
I just came back from a trip to Europe. And when I was traveling from France to Belgium on the train, Eurostar, a Belgian doctor sat next to me. But he had never used ChatGPT. So when I talked to him about like hallucination and things like that, he was like, my God, this is a completely very intimidating new world for him. Yeah. So it's not, I mean, he's younger than I am, but he never used, he heard about this, but never used it. So I think at this moment, at this stage of the development of AI, I think we still need to do workshops in order to facilitate our understanding of how to operate these things. Yeah. But I think sooner or later, it's going to become very intuitive. What's important is, I think, well, let's take Sora as an example. I mean, very soon everybody's going to be able to make movies. Yeah. But the difference is that how creative you are as a director. And so I think basically the idea, I mean, the name of prompt engineer, is that what you mentioned? Prompt engineer is a kind of a name, contradictory, is a inherently contradictory name. Because if you're good at making prompts, that you're not doing engineering. I mean, that's a totally different thing. You need to have very profound training and knowledge of the humanities in order to do, very creative prompting, right? So I think that training is just crucial in the future. So for the kids, they just have to, from the day one in their education, receive a lot of training in creativity, which is, their national language program, mainly taught in literature. I think in the United States, it's all literature, right, from day one. But here, I think it's pretty wishy-washy, everything. Yeah. So, but for the older people, I think, how to make them feel fun, feel that they are having fun, that's the most important thing. Kids too, of course. But kids, I don't think they need to even do any workshop in this. They are much quicker than us, They're quicker than the teachers, I think. So I think when my kid was like 10, I sometimes asked him about how to use my iPhone. He's like, ch-ch-ch-ch. I said, you're too fast. Slow down. All right, ch-ch-ch-ch, like this. I could never understood. I could never understand what he was saying. Yeah. So I don't think in 10 years' time we need to provide them with any kind of training in operating the thing. We need to provide them training in doing creative prompts. Yeah.
And so you suggest that more workshops and maybe liberal arts subjects need to be taught more.
Yeah, no need of workshops, just liberal training, liberal arts training. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
From day one.
All right. What about you, Dr. Armstrong?
Well, I like the idea of a course on how not to get scammed. I think I would probably take that too. I think everyone could use a refresher. I was thinking along similar lines that expertise is still incredibly important. And when we talk about the ability to interpret information, some of which might be synthetic, as one of the earlier topics, but some of it might be, hallucination, and some of it might be really valuable. And to be able to discern between, what's the valuable information, what's not, what's true, what's false, that I think is really key to using these tools well. And then the question is, well, how would you teach that? And I think liberal arts are certainly a great grounding. One place I might start with a 6-year-old is to ask, what do they do really well? What are they an expert in? What do they know a lot about? And then have them engage in prompts about that topic to generative AI. And I think inevitably, I'm thinking about just chat bots in general, inevitably they'll understand the weaknesses and limitations of the bot. It'll give very high-level answers. It might get certain facts wrong. And then that, I think, will be a helpful introduction to what might this be useful for and where to be skeptical of the output.
If I can piggyback off of that, I really agree with those comments. I think healthy skepticism in these tools is going to be very, very important. And whether you're a 6th grader or a 60-year-old, I think understanding that is going to be very important. Identifying truth claims and being able to to engaging in appropriate falsifiability with those truth claims, I think is going to be important. To learn that some of these tools are not right all the time. I think every comment you just made there was I 100% agree with.
Okay. So here comes my last question. Final question is that, go back to the subject, are we ready for a good AI society? And if we are to be ready in the next few years, what remains to be the top agenda or the number one issue that it needs to be addressed? So which panelists would like to tackle this first? Perhaps you, Ned?
I think the thing that I'm very interested in are some of the lawsuits that are going on in copyright with some of these AI tools. I'm sincerely following the New York Times lawsuit against OpenAI. I think that's going to have significant impact into the use of these tools, the economic opportunity for these tools, whether or not they're going to be cash flow positive for some of the companies that are investing in them. So that I think is unsettled. I think that there's going to be interesting results, and I think there's going to be additional legislation after that. What happens? Maybe we should ask ChatGPT after this and get its opinion. But I think I think that is sincerely unsettled, and we'll learn more as time goes on.
Okay, so intellectual property issues.
Yeah.
Okay. So what about you, Ben?
In the 1960s in the U.S., we had a great slogan for a social policy campaign, The Great Society, it was called. So just think about, instead of, what is a good AI society, I would think just what is a great society that we're aspiring toward? It's probably one with close to equal access to basic goods. It's one with a lot of educational opportunity for those who are motivated to learn. It's one with less suffering and poverty. All of these kind of core goals of what it would mean to be prosperous as a society and have a sense of social cohesion. So I think if we think about those core goals, and then I would work backward and say, well, how can technology help us achieve some of those goals? And I think where technology is not helping us achieve one of those goals, maybe it's not worth it to invest so heavily. So that's where I think we could start, is with what really makes a good society, and then work backward to ensure that those goals stay in mind.
Okay, so we have a specific goal. That would be the first agenda that you suggest.
Yeah, I would say that most investments that we make should be working towards some greater goal.
Okay, thank you. And Professor Solovich?
Well, at the risk of reiterating some of the things I said in my talk earlier, from the technical point of view, I think we profoundly don't understand this technology. And so I think either on a theoretical level, I've been trying to encourage my theoretical computer scientist friends to take this stuff seriously and really try to come up with an explanation of how these things actually work internally, not mechanically, but how do they achieve the results that they achieve. Or if that turns out not to be possible, and some people think it isn't, then I think we need a lot more empirical investigation. So again, in the healthcare field, people propose things like saying, bring me a 500-page medical record of a patient, and I'll give it to ChatGPT or one of its ilk, and it will give me a lovely summary of exactly what's important to know about this patient. Well, that's a great vision, but I don't know at the moment how often will it make stuff up, how often will it leave things out, how often will it lead the doctor who's using this to make serious mistakes in judgment that will affect the life of the patient that he or she is taking care of. And so there's a tremendous need for both theoretical and empirical investigation. So I agree, of course, that having appropriate societal goals is probably the most important thing. But I think at a technical level, there's still a lot of work left to be done in order to make a lot of us comfortable with the technology.
So you mean the possible misuse or abuse of AI?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Professor Liao?
When I was listening to your talk, I was surprised. I was surprised that for you, those are mysteries too. So, I think I have a not very good feeling about this, because at this stage, you can tell that they're doing mischievous things, right? You can tell. You can still tell. Maybe in 10 years.
Mischievous implies intent, and I wouldn't give them any intent.
Right. Okay. All right. But I also kind of also work on whether or not objects have consciousness, but this is something else. But anyway, in 10 years' time, or maybe in 20 years' time, maybe it would have gotten a lot more difficult to tell whether or not they're hallucinating, right? Like most of the things they say is correct, but then maybe a little bit of misinformation, but which could be crucial. But you can't tell. I mean, it looks perfectly safe, perfectly convincing, perfectly, supported by evidence. So,
But if I consult a doctor, they're not 100% correct.
I know, but that's now, right? That's now.
Right.
What I'm saying is that in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, it's going to get more and more difficult to tell that they're hallucinating. And so, what I'm thinking is that, the sociologist Jean Baudrillard, he in the 80s already postulated this idea of hyper-real, which means, it looks real, but it's not real. But the fact is, it's a copy, but there's no original. So everything looks real, but everything is fake. And I think we are going to, very possibly going toward that direction. That, in the end, we're already talking about the generation of these large language models, right? They kind of just reprocess their own prejudice or their fake information. And then if you allow them to just, do their self-learning without your guidance or your supervision, then they're going to degenerate further and further. And so I just don't know how to, strike a balance between having the AI doing their own work and, guidance on part of the human beings. Because in the future, I think people would think that, the AI is more and more self-reliant, and therefore maybe there's going to be less and less guidance. And then in the end, we just live in a world completely surrounded by misinformation. And I don't know. I'm just worried. Yeah.
I don't want to leave on such a pessimistic note. I think that I think that the way people learn is they develop funny ideas, and then if they're rational, they test them against the world. And if the world tells you that your funny ideas are incorrect, most rational people will eventually change their mind. Not all, but most. I think as a goal, as a research goal, if I were setting out an agenda for where AI ought to go, it ought to be going in the direction of trying to close that same empirical loop to say, hey, if my model tells me X, I should be able to test whether X is true and learn when it's not. Now, of course, technically, that's exactly what they're doing internally with their starting with random models and converging to something that is a better representation of the reality that they are fed. but the reality that they're fed is not immediate reality. It's all the words and all the pictures that they get from people. If we could close that loop so that an AI is able to reason about the real world and get feedback from that real world, then maybe it will not be susceptible to that sort of solipsism.
Well, I think this kind of idea exchange is quite valuable and interesting because general people, not only the professionals like you, but general people usually have these two very extreme sentiment towards AI. One is the boom day scenario that believing AI is going to, create a lot of value to help us achieve the public good sort of thing. The other is a doomsday scenario that, are very kind of anxious about what the damage or possible, problem caused by AI in the future. So both sentiment exist, and I'm sure they will coexist for a long time. So that's what, we need, not only the scientists, but also people from other area to join to co-develop AI to try to reduce the possible risk and bias. So before I wrap up, I'd like to have each of you that share with us one of your takeaway advice for the audience before I wrap up. So what would that be, Dr. Solovich?
One piece of advice. Be curious, be smart, and do interesting things.
Okay, thank you. And Ned?
Yeah, I think my one piece of advice would be to play around with some of these tools, play around with some of these models, and try and figure out what they do well and what they don't do well with as it relates to your own expertise. My own personal dissatisfaction in some of the dialogue, some of the narrative around these tools as we're talking about them as if it's not, matrix algebra under the hood. We're talking about these tools as, as if they're the next science fiction Terminator, Matrix, doomsday device. And I think that these are really interesting tools that, have a lot of value, but also have some disadvantages. So I'd encourage you to approach them pragmatically. There's a lot of interesting things there, but there's also some downsides. They're wrong often, and that's part of the game.
Okay, and Dr. Liao, your takeaway advice?
Well, very short. Read more literature and live creatively. Actually, literature serves a lot of purposes. Just recently, a daughter of a friend of mine broke up with her boyfriend, and then it was very, very heartbroken. And so he was saying all these stupid things that that the guy has done to his daughter. And I said, all these things were already portrayed in Madame Bovary. If she had read Madame Bovary, then she would have, fallen for this guy. But of course, this is about life, but it's about AI too. If you have read all these, you know how emotionally people can be shaped by what they read. Yeah, and so how are you gonna? On the one hand, you have to read a lot. On the other hand, you have to learn to be aware that we're being constantly shaped or influenced by all the information that we get. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Ben, your takeaway advice for the audience?
Well, I think the question is, would your friend have learned this if they just asked ChatGPT for a summary of Madame Bovary? Probably not. So I think that the ultimate, it would be useless, but I think the concern is, or the thing to remember is that we have a choice of whether we want to use these tools or not. And if they're not useful or they don't give us joy or help us in our lives, we don't need to use them. So I've been hearing a lot of pressure about if you don't use ChatGPT, someone will take your job who knows how to use it better. I just don't think that's true. And just to remember that you could opt not to use these tools if they're not proving to be beneficial in your life and work.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank these four panelists for sharing their insight and perspective, and also to EPOW Foundation for putting up such a great event, not only for this year, but for many years. Also, I'd like to conclude that because the event in 2019, I like the slogan, which I would like to use that to conclude the event today. Since AI is already an inevitable trend, so everyone needs to understand, to learn, to live with it, and also to harness it eventually. So I like, which reminds me of the slogan of the EPOC Foundation event 2019, less artificial, more intelligence. I think that will be the benefit for everyone, help us achieve the good AI society. So thank you very much for your attention, also for the perspective shared by our panelists.
Thank you, John. And